Mercedes Benz is a company with a long and illustrious back catalogue. From the gorgeous 300SL Gullwing to the imposing 600 Grosser and the timelessly elegant SL Pagoda.
But for many people, myself included, Mercedes hit their peak in 1975 with the introduction of the comparatively humble W123. It was everything you could expect from a Mercedes. Well engineered, comfortable, refined and luxurious. It was also bomb-proof reliable, featured rugged, dependable mechanicals and an eclectic lineup of engines and body styles. It was a runaway success for Mercedes and these days is a highly regarded and fast appreciating classic. So if you want to get your hands on what might well be Merc's greatest hit, here's everything that you need to know. The W123 had fantastic quality paint and from 1980, particularly good quality rust proofing for its day. But the earliest examples of these cars are now knocking on for 50 years old, and that means there's still plenty of places where rust can and probably will have developed by now. For a start, the wheel arches, both front and rear. Get your hand up in here, feel all the way around and make sure the arch shape is uniform, smooth and well rounded all the way, so that shows that it's metal and not just filler. You also want to check these rear spats here, and when you're around the front, check the bottoms of the front wings because they can rot away as well. They can get stone chips and that can build up to cause rot and rust over time. It's not uncommon for owners of these cars to put chrome over arches on them, and frankly any car wearing those we would walk away from, because assuming they haven't been put there to cover up rust, by the time they've been on there for a few years they'll probably have trapped moisture in there and caused it. So if you see chrome arches, you better walk. You'll also want to check the battery tray where it meets the bulkhead. The trays themselves can rot out, and if it's left for long enough, the rot can eat its way into the bulkhead itself, and that is enormous and extremely expensive and complicated repair work. So inspect this bit thoroughly, even take the battery out if you can, make sure that all of this is solid. Stone chips and driving into things over time means that this lower valance can also suffer from rust. So again, get right underneath it, feel all the way along and just feel how smooth it is. If it's all bubbly and dimpled all the way along, that's probably a sign there's either filler under here or that rust is about to start poking its way through. If your car's equipped with a sunroof, it's not uncommon for the drainage channels located down the A-pillars of the car to rot out over time. A symptom of this is the trims around the windscreen on the inside looking damp, and of course the carpets having signs of water ingress. The sunroof trays themselves can also rot out over time, and if they do, the sunroof will seize in place and refuse to move. Generally, we'd advise that unless you're absolutely desperate to have a sunroof, just get a car without one, frankly. It's really not worth the aggro. On saloons and coupes, it's unfortunately common for the rear parcel shelf metal to rot out, and that's as a symptom of a failed rear window rubber. An easy way to check for it is bubbling around the rear window, because if there's bubbling on the outside, the rot has already gone all the way through and probably eaten away the metal for the parcel shelf. It's an expensive and complex repair to do, and it's probably a sign of worse things buried beneath. So look all the way around this rear window and make sure there's no misting up around the window, so it shows that it's not letting moisture in. One of the most common MOT failure points for W123s is rust in the boot floor. So get the boot lid open, pull all the carpets and the boards up and have a good look at the condition of the spare wheel well. Make sure it's all smooth, all straight and there's no sign of any rot here. Also look for any signs there might have been water ingress in the past. Are the carpets damp? Are they water stained? Is there any water around the rear lights? Is there any water staining on the boot lining? But if it's not, you're all good. If someone's jacked the car up badly at some stage, it's not uncommon to damage the jacking points themselves, and sometimes it can be bad enough to invite rust on the underside of the car, which once again is another MOT failure point. So get underneath the car, jack it up yourself if you can, and have a good look to make sure that the underside of the car is solid. Sadly, that is the rust done underneath, but not full stop. The bumpers can rot out, front and rear, and the bumpers on the 280e Saloon are actually the same as the ones for the Coupe W123, not the Saloons. We're told the Saloon ones do fit as well, but if you want a completely original and as standard car, that's worth considering. And don't worry, the Estate isn't left out of the rusting action either. On the Estate W123s, the tailgates can rot out, although replacements are available, but sadly the fuel tanks, which are different on the Estate cars, cannot be bought brand new, so you will have to chance it with a second-hand one if yours is rotted out, and once again you might well get one that is on its way to being rotten as well. So inspect it thoroughly, flush it out and give it a damn good coat of underseal. Aftermarket support for 123s is fantastic. You can get pretty much any body panel you like replaced, even from Mercedes themselves. Genuine parts are going to be the best quality, but they will also be by far and away the most expensive. Pattern parts for different parts like the wings do exist. If you're going for a concourse restoration, Mercedes will be more than happy to sort you out, but bring your checkbook. One of the best things about the W123 was its eclectic range of engines. You could have anything from a 2 litre right up to a 2.8 litre 4 or 6 cylinder petrol engine, or anything from a 2 litre up to a 3 litre 4 or 5 cylinder diesel engine. And the rumours are indeed true, these engines are pretty much bomb-proof. Look after them and they really will look after you, pretty much indefinitely. On petrol engines, oil changes need to be as frequently as every 3,000 miles if the car's in regular use. And yes, that can mean as many as 2 or even 3 oil changes every year. Timing chain intervals are every 5 years or 60,000 miles, and it is well worth keeping on top of that. One specialist reported to us that a timing chain that is overdue for changing is more likely to break on a cold morning, where the oil is thicker and the tensioner can't take up the slack as easily because the oil isn't circulating as easily. So keep on top of those intervals if you want to keep this engine in prime health. From 1980 onwards, the 2.3 litre M102 engine ditched carburation in favour of Bosch Cagetronic injection. It's more reliable, it's smoother, it produces more power, and it is more economical. It's well worth getting a post-1980 car for all those other benefits. As for the rest of the driveline, jerky shifts on an automatic car may just require the adjustment of the vacuum control valve. The differentials are solid on all petrol and diesel cars, but if there is any slight oil weeping from the drive shafts, it is likely a knackered seal. Other than that, that really is all there is to look for. 123s are every bit as solid as you've heard. The W123 has got a rugged, dependable suspension setup. There's a reason these cars are so loved in Africa. It's not just the bomb-proof mechanicals, these really can go over some remarkably rugged terrain for a car that isn't even four-wheel drive. If a 123 feels tired and a bit sloppy, there's a good chance it's down to the bushes. With double wishbone front suspension, there are a lot of bushes going on in the suspension of this car. Because there are so many, it's a complex and quite time-consuming job to replace them all. So if you are DIY inclined, set aside a day or even 2 days to do it, and if you're paying someone else, you're in for quite a big bill. The rear trailing arms on 123s can rot out, and if they do, you have to strip down the entire rear suspension setup just to get to them, let alone replace them. So once again, that ain't going to be a quick, cheap or easy job to do, particularly if you're paying someone else to do it. The self-levelling rear suspension on estate models is a Bosch Nevermat system. It's complex, the parts are expensive and hard to find, and these days it's not uncommon for the system to fail. You can delete the self-levelling and go back to a more conventional rear suspension setup like you'll find on the Saloon and the Coupe, but it requires bespoke fabrication and it's not an easy or cheap job to do. Changing wheel bearings is not a DIY job. It requires specialist tools for Mercedes that you can't easily or cheaply buy off the shelf. So if your wheel bearings are starting to go, take your car to a specialist, let them do it. Honestly, it's not worth the time or the headache involved to even attempt to do it at home. The 123 uses a steering box rather than a rack, and whether the car you're looking at has or hasn't got power steering, don't go expecting the last word in feel or directness. But with that said, with the car running, have a good feel of the steering. Does it feel slack? Does it feel too loose or too tight? If it is too stiff, that's probably a sign of an overly tightened up steering box, and it could just be a case of adjusting it to get a little bit more feeling and steering directness back in the car. The W123 featured 4-wheel servo-assisted disc brakes, which for 1975 was fantastically advanced. Even today they hold up well, and this car stops really well. Occasionally the calipers can seize. You can buy a rebuild kit for about a tenner, or for about 60 quid a brand new caliper. Master cylinders can fail over time as well, but it's not a disaster. They don't leak over anything and cause rust, and if you do want to replace it yourself, it's less than an hour's work at about 40 quid. W123 interiors came in 5 different materials. There was MB Tex, which is basically vinyl, leather, velour, cloth and half cloth. Those last 2 are the rarer options, and they're particularly hard to replace parts on if seats, for example, are worn out. Also, there are some colours which are easier and cheaper to track down replacement parts for than others. If your car's got an unusual interior colour like burgundy, for example, you're going to have a harder time finding replacement bits than if your car's got a more common trim colour like black or blue. The seats in 123s have got springs in them rather than foam, and that gives them kind of a unique bouncy quality to them. If the seats have collapsed, which isn't uncommon with age, they're not a DIY repair job. You're going to have to take them to a specialist who can rebuild them for you. The central locking, and on coupe 123s, the mechanism that locks the front seats in place when they've been folded back again, is vacuum operated. So if either of these systems aren't working, it's probably down to either a vacuum leak or a split hose somewhere. As with most vacuum systems, it is quite complicated, so it's not going to be a quick or easy job. We generally avoid buying cars with vacuum issues for that very reason, unless you fancy pulling your brand new purchase straight to pieces. If your 123's air conditioning isn't blowing cold, that's not uncommon. It's nearly 5 decades old by now, and that means it's probably all the gas having leaked out. These days though, you can put more modern gas in there, which is safer and will probably blow it a bit colder. The mileometers can also stick over time, and that means that the mileage on the car you're looking at might not necessarily be as high as it actually is. Unless you're buying a car that's got really low mileage for that very reason, it's probably not an issue anyway. But that said, these cars are capable of such massive mileages, we'd always be tempted to buy one with as big of a number as we could possibly find as a badge of honour. So there's everything you need to look out for if you want to buy yourself a W123. Mercedes sold almost 2.8 million of these things. It's arguably their best car ever. I absolutely love these things, but which one should you buy? If it's a weekend cruiser to cross continents or just a waft through the countryside, then a 6-pot coupe is probably for you. But if you fancy the idea of a daily drivable classic, and for me the 123 defines the term daily driver classic, these are still usable every day, then a diesel saloon or estate will be a perfect choice for you, as long as you get it rust proof to make sure it lasts long term. As for what to pay, £2 is kind of the starting point these days for a project 123. They are restorable, they are repairable, but budget that in, otherwise you will end up spending too much. £5 to £7 gets you your choice of a saloon or an estate 123 with pretty much any of the petrol or diesel engines. But generally, we'd advise to go for an automatic car. It's not a great manual gearbox anyway. It's perfectly durable, but the change is a bit rubbery and it just doesn't feel right for this car. The coupe, meanwhile, is a glamorous and sought after classic these days, and you'll need to pretty much double your budget to £10,000 or £12,000 to get into one. Spend £13 upwards and you've got your choice of the best saloons and coupes on the market. This very 230e is available at Kim Cairns in Norfolk for $12,995, and again, it is pretty much one of the best on the market right now. It's low mileage, it's great condition. This is a 123 to buy and keep for life, and if I buy one now, I wouldn't ever sell it. In fact, kind of fancy this one.